The sun was barely up over the small southern town, painting the front porches gold like God was highlighting old stories. Stories the neighbors still whispered about between sips of sweet tea. Stories where hearts were shattered in ways even Sunday sermons struggled to mend. And Zoe Hartley's name was always somewhere in those quiet sentences, spoken with a soft, "bless her heart," that carried more truth than pity. Because everyone remembered the boy who left and the girl left holding the pieces. Jonah Walker had once driven out of Cedar Creek with his chin high and his pride higher, convinced the world was too big for a town with one traffic light and two churches, leaving Zoe in the rearview mirror like a chapter he would never have to reread. Not knowing that some decisions follow you louder than your own last name, not knowing that the way he shattered her trust would echo in every pew for years, not knowing that God was already working on a day when regret would bring him back, not for applause but for repair. Zoe learned to live with the silence he left behind, turning heartbreak into habit as she baked pies for church fundraisers, led children's choir on Wednesday nights, and sat on her grandmother's porch swing, forcing herself not to look down the dirt road where he had disappeared, learning the language of survival one whispered prayer at a time, telling herself she was over him even when his name still stung like winter air, and promising her own heart she'd never fall for a man who ran from battles again. Until one ordinary December afternoon, with Christmas lights half hanging from porches and carols drifting from the radio, a familiar truck rolled back into Cedar Creek, covered in dust and delayed apologies, and the boy who had once shattered her heart stepped out as a man who'd been shattered too, eyes heavier, shoulders lower, footsteps slower than she remembered, carrying the look of someone who finally understood what he had broken and had come back ready, really ready, to repair what he had destroyed. If your heart has ever been broken by someone who walked away, if you've ever wondered what you'd do if they came back humbled and changed, this story is for you. Because what happens on these southern porches, under these string lights and inside this little white church will show you that God can rewrite even the chapters you'd rather skip, and that sometimes the one who shattered you returns not as a hero, but as a student, learning, slowly, how to love you right. Stay with me until the end, because by the time this story is over, you won't just be watching Zoe and Jonah. You'll be seeing the way God can rebuild what life, pride, and time tried to destroy. And if you love stories of faith, redemption, and second chances, hit subscribe to Redeemed Hearts and don't miss the next miracle. The morning Jonah came back, the air over Cedar Creek felt thicker, like even the humidity knew something old was walking in again. Something that had once slammed a door and left tire marks on Zoe's heart. Something the town had folded into its gossip and then into its prayers. Zoe stood on her grandmother's front porch, coffee mug warming her hands, watching the mist rise over the fields behind the house like a slow confession, having no idea that the sound of an engine down the road would change everything. Her grandmother's farmhouse sat at the edge of town, where the gravel road turned into dirt and the world turned quieter, where crickets sang backup vocals to every late-night prayer, and the porch swing knew more secrets than the church bulletin did. Zoe had grown up there, learning to shell peas and swallow tears, learning that in the South you don't always say what hurts. You stir it into the stew, and you keep moving, one Sunday at a time. Morning looks heavy today, her grandmother muttered from inside the screen door, the old mesh squeaking on its hinges like it had something to add, the smell of bacon and biscuits curling through the house like kindness. Zoe smiled without quite meaning it, eyes still on the empty road, heart used to expecting nothing but still hoping for something unnamed, the way a person keeps checking their phone even when no one texts, a habit she blamed on youth, but knew had Jonah's face. He had left Cedar Creek 7 years earlier with the kind of swagger that doesn't belong to boys who were raised on potlucks and Wednesday night Bible study. But he wore it anyway like an ill-fitting suit, proud and loud. He said he was done with small-town minds and front-porch judgments, ready for city lights, big contracts, and a life where nobody knew his mistakes. He'd ended things with Zoe in one brutal afternoon, his words sharper than any broken bottle behind Mama Jean's diner. "Zoe, we're too different," he'd said, standing in that same yard where they used to chase fireflies barefoot, acting like her dreams were chains and his were wings. "You're happy with this. With church and porch swings and everybody knowing your business, I want more. I can't stay stuck here just because you're afraid to leave." He didn't see the way the words nailed themselves into her memory, or how her silence that day was not weakness. It was shock. She remembered watching his truck disappear down the road, the red taillights blinking like a final goodbye, dust clouds swallowing every memory they'd ever made on that stretch of gravel. Neighbors had watched from their windows, some pulling curtains back, others pretending not to notice. Cedar Creek never missed an exit, and nobody left quietly. By dinner, the whole town knew Jonah had gone and Zoe had been left behind. In the weeks that followed, people showed love the Southern way, dropping off casseroles and pies they never really explained, offering rides, hugs, and half-spoken sentences that began with, "Honey, listen." At church, women squeezed her shoulders during the closing hymn. Men tipped their hats and said, "We're praying for you, sweetheart." Nobody said his name out loud, but it hung in the air like humidity, thick, unavoidable, and clinging to everything. Zoe learned to live around the ache, not without it, choosing to pour her pain into service instead of revenge. She took over the kids' Christmas play at Cedar Creek Chapel, baked for every fundraiser, and showed up early to set up folding chairs. When people said, "Bless your heart," she knew they meant it, and slowly she started to believe God was doing something in the quiet, even if she couldn't see what it was yet. So, on that December morning years later, when she heard the low rumble of a truck coming down their road, she didn't flinch at first. Delivery trucks came all the time, but this sound made something in her chest stutter, like her heart had recognized old footsteps before her mind could catch up. She set her mug down on the porch rail, fingers suddenly cold, and narrowed her eyes at the curve where the road disappeared behind the pines. The truck that came into view was familiar in all the wrong ways. Same deep blue paint, same dent on the front bumper from senior year, same faded sticker from the Cedar Creek Eagles on the back glass. Her breath caught in her throat like it had hit a wall. "No way," she whispered, more to the air than to anyone listening. Her grandmother stepped beside her, squinting at the approaching vehicle, and exhaled slowly like she had been expecting this day all along. "Well, I'll be," Grandma Ruth murmured, her voice carrying that special Southern mix of irritation and grace. "Looks like the boy finally circled back to where he broke something." Zoe swallowed, her pulse hammering in her ears, a rush of memories slamming into her all at once. Laughter, promises, betrayal. She wanted to run inside, to hide behind the curtains like the neighbors used to do. But something inside her refused to move. The truck pulled into the driveway slowly, as if even the engine knew it was entering holy ground and old wounds. When the door opened and Jonah stepped out, Zoe felt like the world had been split into before and after again. He looked older, more tired around the eyes, like life had filled in every crack his pride once hid from view. The boy who left was gone. A man who had clearly been humbled stood in his place. He took off his cap as soon as he saw her, a small gesture, but in Cedar Creek that meant something sacred, a sign of respect, an admission that you were stepping on someone else's pain. "Hey, Zoe," he said, his voice lower than she remembered, as if every word had been weighed before it was allowed to leave his mouth. The sound of her name on his lips dug up every buried feeling she'd packed away and placed them all right back at her feet. Her first instinct was to turn around and walk inside, to let the screen door slam behind her like he'd once slammed his goodbye. But she stayed rooted where she was, hands gripping the porch rail, knuckles pale against the worn white paint. "Jonah," she answered, keeping her tone firm and even, "the way you talk to a stranger who knows too much about you, but hasn't earned the right to anymore." He nodded, swallowing hard, eyes flicking briefly toward Grandma Ruth, who crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow like a one-woman jury. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said respectfully. "Morning," she corrected. "You're late for a lot more than just the clock, son." The air went still for a moment, like even the birds had paused to see what would happen next. And Jonah looked like a man who knew he deserved every second of this discomfort. "I know I got no right to be here," he began, dust from the road still clinging to his boots like regret. I needed to come back. I needed to own what I did." Zoe's heart twisted at the words she'd once begged God to make true, back when she still waited for his texts, for his apologies, for his return. But she wasn't that girl anymore, perched on the edge of hope like a ledge. Now she stood on something firmer. Her faith, her healing, her own 2 feet. "People don't just drive 7 hours to own things, Jonah," she replied softly, her voice calm but not welcoming, restrained but not cruel. "What do you really want?" He looked up then, and she saw it. Shame, sorrow, and something like courage. The kind that comes only after life has knocked you flat a few times. "I want to make right what I broke," he said, the sentence dropping between them like a stone into deep water. The porch, the fields, the whole town seemed to hold its breath, as if Cedar Creek itself had been waiting for this moment, for the day the boy who ran would return as a man willing to face the damage. Zoe felt 100 different answers rise in her chest: rage, hurt, laughter, disbelief, longing, all tangled together. Instead, she just said, "We'll see," and turned toward the front door. Because in the South, forgiveness isn't spoken first. It's proven. The diner bell at dawn never lied about arrivals or intentions, and that morning the ring was slower, deeper, almost reverent, as if the town already sensed Jonah's return was not a victory lap, but more like inventory being reopened on damaged goods. Zoe felt the vibration before the sound faded from the rafters, the echo landing inside her like a familiar test she had not studied for, a pop quiz she hoped she'd never have to take again. She stepped inside the Honeycomb Bakery to deliver 2 pecan pies for the Christmas window display, her boots tapping floorboards like someone who carried history in her cadence, not knowing the bakery lights would soon spotlight more than desserts. But a past that returned wearing regret like an old coat, stitched uneven but undeniably his. Quiet humility folding itself into her breath. Zoe avoided eye contact with the dust-mote beams of morning sun, her pulse in minor rebellion against her composed posture, heart whispering, "Be steady, girl, steady as the porch you survived on." Because southern towns smelled heartbreak better than maple syrup, and this one had stored theirs for years like a jar in the cellar, sealed, labeled but not exactly forgotten, aging into wisdom instead of fading. The orchard behind the house rustled like pages turning, branches older than apologies but patient as time's handwriting. Zoe's mind drifted to the rhythm of apple harvests long gone, fall fairs where laughter once hugged heartbreaks unaware, where Jonah never lost a contest he never had to finish, and Zoe quietly carried trophies she never asked for, victories called endurance. Jonah walked into town that morning carrying boxes of undone consequences, finding a town that measured redemption slower than maple syrup dripped but sharper than diner gossip, loud in truth, quiet in patience. The South didn't need press releases for heartbreaks or rebuilds. It witnessed by presence, not by declarations, and Zoe could feel presence learning shape around their reunion. His attendance taken long after the hurt started. Zoe passed the gift-wrapping booth at the fairground gazebo, where volunteers measured intentions in spoken hesitations and unspoken gestures, too small for microphones to justify. She wanted to bolt for inside curtains again, but flannel-sleeved faith had taught her that running only delays chapters, never erases them, especially in towns that pray louder than they complain, but heal quieter than both. Jonah stood by the bakery orchard gate later that afternoon, cap in hand, not asking for forgiveness yet, letting humility arrive first. Humility in the South was like pie on windowsills in winter, served warm without needing announcements. "Better behave, y'all," old Mrs. Pritchard had once said, Zoe quoting the memory without smiling, regret pacing inside her like wind remembering impact. Zoe turned toward the shop windows glowing with Christmas yarn lights as families laughed around booths offering fudge and homemade wreaths, and nothing to prove but presence and soft seasonal dirt road philosophies. Jonah had said he wanted more once, but the South offered more in the form of constancy. Daily attendance taken before forgiveness was even discussed, a practicality her spirit still carried. The fairgrounds that winter smelled like cinnamon and firewood, faith heated like mugs held by both hands. Zoe could feel wood-sliced fairness rising around accepted truths, neighbors leaning on rails like witnesses of necessary confrontations. Truth glowed warmer here than shame ever did, and Jonah could not edit that glow with swagger. Zoe inhaled carefully, heart bracing for inventory shelves restocked. Jonah crossed the square that afternoon, slow, measured, unavoidable as gravity, boots scraping gravel like someone paying overdue emotional rent. County fairs decorated entrance receipts in string lights and pop country songs. But redemption needed no soundtrack, just proof. Zoe watched boots around town like someone verifying identity markers, assuming cold pride was still in those wheels. But both truck and mindset had finally worn difference. "Well, reckon he came back dented," one shopkeeper said, wiping hands on flour dust aprons. Dented in the South meant shaped by truth, not ruined by it, curved by consequences but softened by grace, like pottery fired hot once, but now forged into humility too, measured like a hand stirring fudge pots quietly, stable as her Sunday voice. Zoe plated fairness toward facts quietly at the Cedar Creek Community Outreach booth, children singing carols off-key, but faith perfectly tuned around them. Jonah had boxed regret privately for years, finding receipts heavier than diner bells and intentions practical enough to prove themselves quiet, not expecting acceptance, only confrontation finalized. Zoe inhaled carefully, heart more rooted than startled. He once assumed invincibility could not be edited, but y'all, God edits egos by gravel road currencies too. Zoe watched crickets whisper judgment into orchard sidelines again, their noise respectful, their lighting honest. And Jonah was finally reading the orchard receipts, boots rewriting their purpose by return, not escape, like peaches ripening overdue trust into daily action soon. Neighbors observed him from the outreach folding chair setup, planning that afternoon, prompt for redemption, walking in measured vowels and unmeasured hope. Because redemption here meant attendance before declarations, humbling before applause. Church bells chime every Sunday, and fair speeches sometimes break minds, but honest hearts prove change quieter than roaming. Zoe could feel presence measuring itself around his re-entry, hopeful but cautious. Zoe gently recoiled deeper than orchard shadows, reading hearts by presence, not by statements. Storms whispering, reopening old chapters, inventory quietly taken. Jonah once held invincibility as his default metric, but regret had taxed his heart heavier than kilometers driven, leaving Zoe to learn the South's slow but immovable embroidery of forgiveness, measured not by slogans, but by daily proof only grace could fund. Zoe believed forgiveness needed receipts written in small-town currencies too, not bold announcements or duffel bag odes. Jonah believed forgiveness would greet first, but the South welcomed confrontation as inventory retake signage, baking patience into candle jars quietly held. And Zoe had jarred years where he jarred days. Daily attendance needed no press kit here, only proof warmer than sweet tea. The bridge overlooking Blue Ridge, Tennessee that winter carried lights that gleamed like overdue redemption, reflecting softly instead of roaring. Jonah felt small enough to rewrite himself, old enough to confront his exit. Truth glowed warmer here than shame ever did, and return was not applause. It was accountability wearing snow-dusted boots. Zoe exhaled slowly, heart steady, but decidedly immovable. She did not perform healing anymore. She embodied it, like a quilt sewn by hands older than duffel bag philosophies, stitched slow, golden, durable as scripture carried by habit. And when Jonah looked up from her orchard path, she knew return was not repentance yet, only attendance taken late. But attendance could lead to repair if repair showed its work, and God in the South always made sure the work would show. The church pews of Cedar Creek Chapel creaked softly that morning, wood carrying memories like a tongue with a long accent, no microphone needed for truth in the South. It traveled in echoes and porch stories, and Zoe felt every vibration like a reminder that some wounds have a timetable too. Jonah sat at the back, cap off, humility now his default attire, boots silent, heart loud with inventory yet unpaid, presence counted before forgiveness was even discussed here. Zoe prepared the potluck table after service, hands dusted with flour and theology, because potlucks in the South were communion with sides of macaroni and collard greens, not announcements, just presents packed in Tupperware and soft-spoken, "Y'all dig in." Jonah remembered grabbing plates proudly once, but now just attendance, eyes avoiding certainty like someone studying forgiveness quietly, not to perform healing, only to build it. Discomfort not exactly hostile, just deserved. Zoe's cousin Maggie Hartley leaned toward Grandma Ruth's Christmas wreath boxes in the outreach storage shed. wrapping gossip in flannel sleeves delicately pragmatic. "Reckon so," she muttered quietly. Town voices quieter than roaming engines but louder than shame could bottle. Jonah once assumed rescue greeted first, not consequences rising slower. But both truck and mindset had finally worn difference. Zoe passed the thrift stall at the Cedar Creek Christmas Festival Square that winter, selling homemade fudge and silent but immovable inner convictions, not expecting applause or recognition, only presence that could heal without spectacle. Jonah saw her from the welcome booth outside the barn, regret rising in his throat like hymns too high, villain once cast. Student of repair now returned, boots rewriting purpose by return, not escape. Zoe placed jars of sweet tea on the festival folding table rail that afternoon, because practicality in the South was immovable as oak roots. Jonah once roared. Regret once chased louder. This town prayed loud at festivals and quietly in consciences. Return was not applause. It was accountability scripted by God and witnessed by neighbors. Zoe could feel presence measuring around his return. Hopeful, but cautious as fists gripping folding chairs. Zoe overheard the choir kids practicing carols in the Sunday school room once again. Voices squeaky on high notes and uncertain on verses. Emotionally glossy like dough beaten with quiet resistance. Regret threatening to rise in her throat like a vow unspoken to. Jonah once shattered more than apologies could fund. Return here was attendance. Repair is apprenticeship. And wounds smelled honesty fast, forgiveness slow. Zoe's best friend Sarah Colburn stirred cocoa at the barn festival later that afternoon near the Christmas tree lot, wiping hands like someone who carried heaven calmly enough to swallow storms too. "Better behave, y'all," she quoted with measurable Southern realism earned by marriage. Eyes flicking toward Jonah, who once splintered trust itself, not expecting forgiveness to greet first. Just quiet inventory taken pathway by boots. Studentship paced now. Jonah stood at the riverbank after festival later that afternoon, reminded that some stories start at gravel roads and get paid in wood grain currencies only grace can fund. Zoe watched from the church porch. The South always spoke truth over rivers and folding tables alike, and she whispered to herself slower than his boots traveled. Repair is a louder miracle than return. The river glinted like God was underlining decisions. Jonah lit lanterns by the creek later that night. Not staged, no big contracts, just inventory on intentions thicker than winter chill. Zoe heard the faint plink of glass jars being stacked by neighbors inside outreach pantry sheds once again through Nashville's snow-chilled barns too, stirring cocoa and prepping event benches reverently but practically. Jonah once held trophies louder than he held hearts, but regret had taxed him heavier than counties traveled, and forgiveness here proved itself by consistency, not by slogans. County fairs lit jar receipts in strings of warmth and slow forgiveness currencies. But redemption needed no soundtrack. Just work done visible enough for church mothers to witness quietly. Jonah saw quilt seams and apology timetables slower, measured like fudge stirred patiently. Presents a heavier donation than fireworks ever made. Zoe carefully folded tables after festival service, knowing forgiveness was not just language. It was evidence unfolding slower than rural dusk, and Jonah once shattered more than diner bells could mend. But presence could fund renewal if renewal stayed in daily choices. "She didn't run inside anymore, mister," Grandma Ruth whispered later that night, sound low, tone high on fairness and flannel warmth. Student of consequences, student of her trust. Zoe stitched wreaths afterward quietly, but roots immovable as gospel vows only daily proof can fund. Jonah had circled back, matured by distance that had taxed him quietly but surely. Porches and announcements in the South always weighed truth like overdue rent paid by footsteps, not slogans. Zoe placed candles for the Christmas Eve bonfire vigil later that week. Soft light flickering against wood grain benches older than delayed apologies but patient like time's handwriting. Neighbors speaking truth by folding chairs and fudge rails too. She slid boots silent. Hearts loud with expectations deliberately pruned and intentionally measured by presence slower than wandering engines. Not hostile, but deserved. Jonah rebuilt pantry boxes for the outreach pantry system after midweek service. Tupperware stacked like tiny evidence that actions echo louder than any truck leaving or circling back. Small-town hearts verifying consistency. Couples laughed strolling behind festival barn lights, masons stirring cocoa, jar receipts waiting to be restocked by daily faith choices pruned not loud. Zoe exhaled slowly, because forgiveness in Cedar Creek would not roar or demand. The work would show, oak roots weaving small-town languages that God would one day fund with presence. Truth glowed warmer here than shame ever did. Cedar Creek was never a place where stories passed unnoticed. It was the kind of town that archived heartbreaks like heirlooms, stacked beside church cookbooks and county fair ribbons, but also the kind of place where grace entered before conclusions. Zoe had built her name into service here, not into spectacle, and her silence was no longer avoidance. It was discernment, the steady exhale of someone healed enough to stay. The town square felt warmer under Christmas pine glow, strings of lights adorning lampposts like tiny suns held together by wire and hope. Jonah walked slower now, shoulders loose, eyes measured, heart carrying the sound of undone things he once ignored proudly. But in the South, humility was not declared. It was seen in how you carried chairs, stacked jars, and acknowledged the work before applause. Grandma Ruth had taught Zoe that pride's exit always echoed, but Grace's return echoed louder even when whispered. "Repair needs patience," she said while tying ribbons, "and stubborn love looks like staying when the road invites you to run." Zoe had stayed stubborn but soft, strong but sweetened by God, knowing reconciliation would knock someday wearing dust instead of ribbons, truth instead of trophies. Zoe met Jonah again at the community pantry shed, paint chipping white, wood grain smelling like endurance and overdue prayers. Jonah's sleeves were rolled like someone doing work they once mocked, fingers brushing old crates like someone greeting the past respectfully. Zoe handed him a jar of sweet tea, not to thaw the moment but to measure it honestly, because healed hearts serve truth first. Jonah had walked away proud but came back quieter, studying the town he once dismissed like an unexpected teacher. The community mothers stirred cocoa and whispered comparisons between him and consequences, busy hands folding tablecloths, washing mugs, stacking mason jars again, but with gentle commentary, not hostility. Memory served as fairness. He once assumed small towns were too narrow for big contracts or redemptive plots to grow quietly enough. But conviction here measured itself by presence alone. Storms carried undone obligations far heavier than county drives, and Southern hearts archived truth and time signatures without needing microphones to survive. She built her healing on that porch, one volunteer murmured, wiping hands like someone measuring consistency in casseroles and scriptures alike. And he built his regret on roaming, so let's see if roaming walks softer now. Zoe heard without reacting, boots rooted steady as gospel receipts only daily actions could earn here. Jonah swallowed redemption like someone consuming a vow unspoken, standing by the fair light's softer reflection of practical theology sish. Not expecting recognition to greet first, only clarity served slow, dense, fair. Zoe placed Christmas wreaths for sale on the gazebo rails that festival afternoon, not expecting Jonah's boots or his voice among the crowds that drifted slowly through barn lights. Festivals archive hearts. God archives intentions. This town archived theirs. Jonah drifted toward blue shadows near the outreach wood stacked this winter afternoon, not announcing regrets yet, just stacking chairs for the Christmas Eve bonfire vigil again on that hill. His head dipped. Her heart measured deadlines unseen. The fair smelled like cinnamon and prayer's steady timeline, lighting harsh egos into humility without needing text overlays to stay profound. Zoe inhaled carefully, heart steady but immovable, like someone who carried oak root constancy quietly enough to swallow storms without running, strong enough to heal daily, humble enough to serve reconciliation without spectacle. Jonah learned that humility in the South had a weight and a witness, so he showed up at the pantry without excuse badges or polished posture, just the raw attendance of a man who had rehearsed regret privately for years. Zoe felt the moment as she aligned donation boxes, eyes softened by furnace-fired prayer, heart remembering the past, but listening for evidence of change now older than dust. Some stories in the South aged like preserves in glass jars, sealed but not silenced, and Jonah was finally reading labels he once ignored proudly. He once assumed distance diluted consequences, but Cedar Creek diluted nothing. Return did not equal repair. Only integrity could sign that contract. Jonah folded blankets for the regional winter outreach drive with movements slower than apologies televised, hands colder than nostalgia, but warmer than pride ever felt. Zoe watched, not with softness naive, but with Southern practicality testing itself steadily, like a jury balanced between judgment forwarded and mercy applied. The barns of Hawthorne Hollow stood steady in the winter dusk, painted in repurposed wood tones carried by generational trust, neighbors greeting snow-dusted revelation not by microphones, but by boots tapping gravel like truth's deliberate cue. Jonah once shattered her trust quietly enough God would eventually highlight receipts of consequence. But now redemption needed to travel visible enough, gentle enough to linger, loud enough for integrity to sign daily. Zoe poured cocoa for the volunteers the quiet Southern way, steam shaped like prayers rising unseen above her hands, not announcing hope out loud, only stirring it into the circles of everyday attendance. Jonah stood by the tree lot path, finally noticing wreath seams, overdue payments, and evidence of repair, eyes flicking toward farm lights and hearts cautiously hopeful. In Cedar Creek, truth spoke first, forgiveness came after attendance, and redemption always showed its work slower. The winter parade route shimmered with a hush of community realism earned by time. Lights hung modest, carols off-key but theology perfectly tuned, and Jonah carried remorse gentler, footprints slower, like someone who knew even a gravel road deserved an apology. Zoe watched from the edge of the outreach barn, heart steadier, voice tucked into minor Southern hesitations, God already rehearsing a rebuilt contract unseen. Jonah exhaled beside the old dining hall storage with a quiet but audible, almost reverent acknowledgement that return was not applause, only accountability. The yard silent, hearts loud with expectations forwarded and pruned intentionally. Zoe stitched wreaths without press kits, kneading faith into decisions daily chosen instead, boots rewriting purpose softer than shame, older than distance, and undeniable in small but visible gestures of change. By dusk, Zoe knew. Pride had left louder than any truck could fade, but grace would eventually greet by practical witness alone, not bold release but humble attendance measured by neighbors. Jonah stood humbled, measuring repair like a late student fearing no teacher more than conscience itself, finally noticing the jars of sweet tea, folding chairs and overdue payments of consequence, heart slower, voice lower, boots deeply Southern, God already highlighting receipts unseen before forgiveness could be spoken. The gravel under Jonah's boots carried more theology than any sermon notes he ever took, a sound heavier than youth and truer than polished returns. And the town baristas at Daisy May's Cafe didn't greet comebacks with fanfare, only with studied silence. Zoe saw his arrival from the coffee steam, not startled but observant like someone who once paid emotional rent years in advance, measuring him like a story waiting to be earned, not just told. Zoe stirred sweet tea at the pantry truck drop-off point again, because practicality here was theology in mugs, not words. Jonah had once mocked small-town fairness, but now fairness was the compass in his back pocket, pulling him toward repair slower than rivers pulled tides but more forceful than pride could ever resist. Grandma Ruth tapped his shoulder lightly later that afternoon, her voice dipped in honey but edged in realism. Jonah, forgiveness ain't free, son, she said. But God don't charge interest, people do. Jonah nodded without defensiveness, hat off, shoulders softened, heart unsettled for repair but not running anymore. County custom said apologies started in action, not language, so Jonah helped stack folding chairs for the festival speech that week, hands colder than applause but warmer than pride had felt. Presents his overdue payment now handed in quietly, a submission more sincere than any battle cry. Zoe walked past the tree lot shack where Jonah stood, first Briggs dusting winter realism into conversations without script overlays. "Better behave, y'all," Sarah quoted as choir backup, a line Zoe inhaled, remembering not to run inside curtains anymore. Redemption had re-entered like gravel-born evidence, slow, inevitable, measured by presence. Jonah remembered pies cooling in open bakery windows from Mabel's old porch route, where Orchard kept preserves archived heartbreak whispers that God would rewrite contracts for eventually. Neighbors measured trucks leaving and hearts returning, not expecting rescue to greet first meant only receipts of work, signed by action slower. The workshop bench at Mabel's tree shack was chipped, like Jonah's belief in invincibility had been chipped too. He ran fingers along wooden surfaces like someone reading Braille in the dark, learning the grain of redemption he once sneered at, not expecting softness naive, only justice slow. The town didn't speak forgiveness loudly. It saw it in how long you stayed. Jonah didn't ask for forgiveness. He showed he was staying. Presence and overdue payment heavier than regret written in Tupperware or fairground announcements, quieter than roaming engines, louder than shame ever shaded. Zoe whispered, rearranging jars at outreach. The heart that stays don't fear roads. It redeems them. Jonah's pulse hammered inventory into decisions. But decision-making here was slower than any engine fade-out could fund, more southern than harsh. Jonah held crates for the Grace Harbor Pantry Christmas can drive, assuming rescue greeted first not consequences cued by neighbor witnesses again, but neighbors cued stories by presence alone. No press badge. Jonah passed the shed entrance speechless, carrying overdue conscience like plates heavier than fair-tasting fudge pans, cooling quietly on the edge again in town's memory. Anger here was confronted like winter rent, accepted like attendance before forgiveness could even be spoken. And redemption showed its work slower, boots rewriting realism sewn into daily choices. Zoe saw boots tapping gravel, but gravel smelled honesty fast, forgiveness slow. And Jonah knew his next line needed to be earned, not just spoken. Jonah worked at renewing orchard fences later that week. No neon overlays for redemption needed exactly proof visible enough for a humbled man who once ran from carols, but now faced consequences daily. Zoe folded blankets for the festive Christmas tree lot route, hands dusted with pine realism. Truth warmer here than shame ever was. Redemption an overdue vow boxed privately by conscience that God would rewrite without interest, but with witness. Jonah approached festival fairground pathways again, not expecting welcome softness, only confrontation fare. Zoe offered solemn silence in place of offense first, boots immovable as a testimony served without soundtrack. Jonah finally exhaled. Inventory reopened for repair. Zoe thought healing meant forgetting, but forgetting was never Southern, because in places like Willow Bend, Georgia people preserved truth like peaches and confronted wounds like weather. Jonah returned not with speeches wrapped in ribbon, but with a humility that walked before it talked, a presence more honest than his silence ever was. Inventory on regret finally unboxed quietly. The winter wind around Cedar Creek Bridge never cared for first impressions, only lasting ones. But Zoe's heart stalled anyway, boots edging gravel-born waiting silence. Jonah saw her from church gaze shadows without overlay optimism, not expecting rescue to greet first, only justice spoken by constancy. Jonah remembered running from small-town fair speeches proudly once, but rebuilding was evidence sown slower than roaming engines quitting. And Zoe watched someone who embodied meaning like collard greens at potlucks, faith kneaded into tables folded, cat shadows archived around truth quietly church-bound. The diner ladies at Bluebell Roadhouse measured hearts by posture of staying, not slogans broadcast, boots tapping like redemption rescheduled firmly into future. He did not ask forgiveness yet. Attendance was first. Zoe folded blankets for the candlelit winter drive, hands dusted with pine realism. Truth warmer here than shame ever was. Presence a heavier donation than fireworks. The South writing reconciliation like receipts earned, not announced. Jonah held donation crates in silence's folded evidence heavier than hesitation on carol lines, not expecting applause or interviews to script authenticity. Zoe felt the moment like a dovetail join, snapped twice in conscience's view, firm enough to stay. Hope tastes sweeter when humble stays, the old farmer said near the outreach bonfire stacks. Zoe overhearing as if quoting heaven quietly, because forgiveness in the South had shape measured like fudge, stirred patiently. Attendance needed no press kits, only proof. Jonah brewed coffee at Mabel's old recipe bench, now reverent toward owl shadow consequences like store shelves, hindsight raised not roaring. Zoe glanced at the volunteer benches now, not with naive welcome, but with a slow Southern realism inventory, testing if humility would stay longer than roaming did. Jonah once assumed invincibility could not be corrected, but Willow Bend corrected hearts simply by making students face receipts. Zoe saw the candle flames flicking against rustic white paint like stories older than trucks, but glued by scripture-slow decisions. Jonah swept the dining hall floor the silent Southern way once again, not for applause, only for alignment between heart and evidence. Zoe inhaled the moment carefully while lining jars for the Christmas walk route, measuring return not harshly, but justly. Jonah carried overdue rent in action softer than pride ever shouted. Return cost lower, repair cost daily presence. Zoe placed candles for the vigil again, meaning one truth clear. The heart doesn't clap, it confirms. Jonah stacked chairs slower than tides, learning forgiveness here was attendance, not slogan. Oak roots his new default expectation. Zoe offered measured silence in place of offense first, boots immovable as testimony, heavier than tape-cut fame. Jonah exhaled, inventory reopened. The winter dawn stretched over Cedar Creek, Tennessee with a softness that fooled nobody about what was coming. Jonah had been back for weeks, but still walking like a man paying dues in installments, boots scraping gravel louder than words ever could, humility uneven but sincere. And the town watched like quiet witnesses sipping sweet tea on porches, waiting to see if he came to stay or only to soothe his conscience briefly. Because in the South, roads don't forget the sound of pride. Hearts only heal if humble remains. Zoe stood at the edge of her family's Christmas tree patch on Pinewood Farm Road. Flannel coat wrapped tight, breath visible like a whispered prayer rising in cold air, hands carrying twine and old routines that once held wounds, now only clarity. Her heart steady like hand-quilted fabric that time had finally strengthened. She was no longer pacing, she was no longer stumbling. She was only discerning, measuring the road, the wind, the trees, and the man who once shattered more than silence could cover. Jonah parked his truck outside Daisy's Hardware to buy fence nails and propane. Receipts that had nothing to do with contracts but everything to do with staying. Nods exchanged with locals more practical than poetic, but underline bold in presence, because you buy nails when you're fixing fences, not chasing neon. And Jonah Walker was fixing more than fences. He was repairing consequences, identity by identity, board by board, not asking forgiveness yet, just letting redwood grain confession. Seasons show quietly. The festival stood half-assembled near the dining hall gazebo, string lights dangling like stars, not finished setting up the night sky properly enough. Choir teens practicing hay bale stage backdrops for Christmas plays once again. Zoe hearing voices off-key but theology perfectly tuned behind observed redemption. Jonah once sneered at this exact setup culture, now sweeping floors there quietly again to earn Sunday sunlight. Zoe didn't know Jonah had started helping set up the benches, carrying folding chairs into patched realism he once ran from. Presents his overdue payment now turned into weekly submissions quietly, but firmly approved by the wind. Jonah had jarred regret privately for years. But jars here held preserves, not proclamations, and preserved hearts required action now. The county road smelled change like pine resin in December. Sharp, immediate, unannounced, theology measured by boots tapping, Jonah's swagger long pruned by time. Zoe passed the dining hall lantern vendor table once more, her jaw set firm but her eyes framing truth, not denial. Only accuracy respectful enough to linger. Jonah remembered county fairs from his youth too, tickets purchased for rides he never finished but later apologized for by immovable conscience alone. Southern wisdom served cold like, "That'll preach." Zoe heard the gravel plink under boots again, heart not startled, only remembering. Jonah watched lights shimmering through festival barn windows too, warm enough to underline Christmas tone, cold enough to forward consequences, boots rewriting purpose slower than road invites, but truer than any staged revival. Zoe believed forgiveness needed nothing louder than God's own quiet highlight reel, not bold announcements, only consistency proven by attendance, hearts authored by daily showing up, not by slogans. Jonah folded blankets for the festival storage shelving once more, cool enough to whisper, warm enough to stay. Zoe handed Jonah a plate of Christmas fudge later that afternoon, voice softened by flannel theology, but firm as overdue inventory still being read. Jonah once chased invincibility, but in the South you face receipts. Christmas lights at the festival glowed like God was underlining overdue redemptions not by microphones but by winter-shed footholds quietly bending pride without fully erasing what happened first. Zoe exhaled slowly. Let's see if humble stays long enough. Jonah exhaled too. Inventory reopened on the heart. Zoe never imagined the past would walk into her present like a winter refund she never requested. But forgiveness in the South moved like warm pies on cooling racks. Slow, realistic, intentional. Jonah returned not roaring, only showing up like someone reading heaven's handwriting in gravel dust. County-shaped wins never needed microphones to archive emotional inventories, and Zoe believed grace could rebuild what pride once splintered, if humble stayed long enough. Jonah rented his old room above River's barbershop, where the mirror lights flicked softer than stadium applause, highlighting a man rebuilt by consequence, not faded by it. Every razor stroke now measured like theological punctuation marks. Quiet, but reverent. Zoe led the kids' choir at Cedar Creek Faith Center that afternoon, boots on floorboards steady enough to mate overdue thoughts. Jonah watching from the hallway, not expecting applause. Only justice served slower than roaming engines. The pantry shed behind Grace Harbor Outreach smelled roasted pecans and overdue rent. Truth warmer there than any shame shade could convert. Zoe heard the boots not startled, only remembering. At the Christmas market barn, lantern stalls glowed like God scheduling an emotional inventory retake. Small-town contentment measured in mugs, not slogans. Zoe stable enough to measure Jonah's attendance as riffs of realism in southern pathways. Jonah helped load crates for the Cedar Creek Lantern Trail practice at dusk again. Fingers brushing wooden rails like someone greeting the past respectfully, not expecting welcome softness, but honest confrontation. Came back humble? One farmer asked near the pinewood tree lot with hats tipped low but realism dipped high. Reckon we'll see if humble stays longer than roaming did. Zoe wiped cocoa mugs at the Blue Ridge Roadhouse that evening, steam rising like quiet warfare on undone conscience battles that once roamed freely. Zoe believed presence could rebuild if presence stayed. Jonah sat at the creek bank carving his aunt's old canoe wood, studying forgiveness like a late student studying gravity. Boots deep, tone humble, heart unsettled but not fleeing anymore. Zoe believed forgiveness had the shape of daily attendance before proclamation. Like quilts sewn by hands older than duffel bag philosophy, stitched slow, but sure. Jonah brewed coffee at the pantry bench the silent southern way once more, not for applause, only for alignment between heart and evidence. God quietly pleased. Zoe placed candles for the vigil again, dozen flames flicking like punctuation marks at the end of unspoken sentences. Jonah worked in renewed orchard fences under the overdue rent trail winter queue, because even gravel roads know when someone means to stay. Zoe measured not his return, but the work he carried. Zoe offered solemn silence in place of offense first, boots immovable as testimony served without soundtrack but compassion deeper than pride could shade. Jonah once believed invincibility could edit time reels, but time edited Jonah by presence this winter vigil afternoon, frost cooler than his pride once felt. Zoe exhaled a breath warmer than the December pines, voice tucked into quiet southern notes, God already writing repair labels. Jonah looked up from folding chairs near the festival nativity barn, finally seeing hands warmer than his pride, forest older than his roaming, road wiser than his leaving. She whispered softly, if humble stays, repair will show its work. The Christmas lights in the south shimmer like tiny suns wired together by God's own screenplay, but neon never got credit for redemption in a town built on truth and front-porch theology. Zoe stood again on the same hill where ancient pines whispered verdicts not cruel, only factual. Belief pruned, not erased. Heart steadied, not hardened. Knowing the return wasn't the miracle. The staying was, forgiveness scheduled slower than wandering, sincerer than duffel bag pride. Jonah knew. He had shattered more than a heart. He had fractured a testimony. But testimonies had a rhythm of repair too. Zoe believed missteps could be repurposed if confronted respectfully, not if announced boldly. The wind never needed microphones to archive the theology of a humbled man. It only needed a witness to see if he would stay longer than he'd once left. Zoe felt that witness in seasons measured like cocoa ladles held by both hands, warm glow steadied, soul aware, but decidedly immovable. Jonah remembered. Forgiveness here answered slow like sweet tea poured into conscience's cup quietly. Evidence rising warmer than shame ever shaded. Zoe watched him kneel, not physically yet, but spiritually already reverent toward receipts, heart updated, timeline edited by constancy, not speed. Jonah once assumed roaming diluted consequence penalties on exit routes, not encryption slop, Barnes archived. Zoe believed presence could fund renewal. The church bell had rung inventory that day, too practical, not omitted. People tipping hats low but realism high. God whispering final schedules into the winter choir. Kids practicing inside barns whispering forgiveness like stages, avoid him not running softly. Jonah prayed on porch rails heavier than fame's soundtrack illusions ever gave him. And redemption was cost cheaper than spectacle, but confrontation truer. Zoe served cocoa again with her aunt preparing lantern-lit logs donation path. Boots deep, tone humble. Frost like receipts folded into generational wood-grain truths. Jonah felt it then. Realization settling like snow on old letters. Repair had to travel visible enough for the conceited hearts to witness quietly, gentle enough to linger, loud enough for integrity to sign. Zoe didn't speak hostility, only alignment between heart and evidence. Trust built plank by plank, warmer than winter storms funneled by choir chime conditions referencing dishes and southern hospitality texturas. Threshold by threshold. Jonah inhaled winter cocoa scent carried by Mabel stew, older than denial. Humbled by attendance, constancy channeling reconciliation quietly but surely. Zoe believed forgiveness had the shape of daily attendance like wreath twines her testimony used to fund jitter tones again. Jonah once believed applause was the metric, but presence rewrote metrics by proximity here. Zoe saw Frost glow fade slower like someone healed enough to stand but discerning enough to measure truth before softness. Jonah crossed the creek bank again at the edge of Blue Ridge Hollow, boots planted deeply, humility now unequivocated future vantage point. Zoe exhaled softly. Repair is a louder miracle than return, but humble must stay. Then Jonah took one more breath, crossed condemnation boundaries. I ain't here to show up, Zoe. I'm here to stay. He walked toward the porch rail and sat beside her, boots heavy in gravel. Heart aligning warmer than shame ever shaded. And Zoe felt the sound. The sound was staying. The wind around the barns held quiet judgment that matched a repavend. The night of the Christmas festival bonfire had a hush different. Flames marking sky the southern way. Warm, reverent, prayer-bound. Jonah stood outside her porch, cap off, breath visible, heart loud with unfiltered truth. Zoe, I don't want a second chance. I want the right chance. She swallowed frost air, exhale warmer than shame, and finally nodded. Jonah reached for her hand, not demanding forgiveness, asking only for presence's contract. By the creek bank lit by Christmas lantern trail shadows again, the pines tall, the road wise, the God present. Jonah bent close, heart cued by winter membership of that small-town taste of repentance unframed, not roaring. And when the lights flickered modest like tiny suns hung to witness hearts over fences, Jonah whispered, faces near, breath steady, I'm here, Zoe, then looked into her eyes like they were new scripture pages. And I'm staying. And then it happened. Not loudly, only sacredly. He bent close like someone entering a long-due reconciliation softly. And Zoe didn't run. She listened. Jonah walked inventory into presence until presence walked inventory into forgiveness. Like a hand-painted moment that needed no press release to be true here again, on porch rails and pines seen. Jonah placed both hands on the porch rail, quietly towering breath bundled with theology. Eyes glinting like overdue hope refunded by grace unseen, but warmer than shame ever shaded. The November pines behind the creek whispered softly. But Jonah didn't need the wind to announce his changes anymore. He leaned forward, closer than the past had ever allowed. Articulation measured, regret confronted, humility shooed in flannel-sleeved presence. Zoe lifted her eyes, finally meeting truth, not running from it, because Southern hearts don't fear confrontation, they fear inconsistency. But Jonah's gaze now carried consistency. His cap dropped to the porch boards as her breath curled like winter prayers, rising slower. He leaned in, eyes glimmering with reverent realism, pride no longer roaring, forgiveness no longer chased, redemption now studied like a new dialect mastered. "I broke you back then," he whispered, "and you stayed." The sentence warmer than wind, sharp as scripture lessons the South already archived quietly. He brushed her face delicately, not rushing the moment, because forgiveness here was proven daily. Faith always doing its work slower than soundtracks could justify. The lantern light shimmered on the creek water like emotional gloss steadied enough for God to nod without shouting, because this town knew. Hurt speaks louder than returns, but grace speaks longer if humble stays. Zoe inhaled slowly, a decade of emotion rewriting itself at the exhale. Remembering the boy who left proudly but now seeing the man who finally stayed to earn, not demand, repair. He leaned in softly then, but sure, the movement measured, the silence sacred, the heart open, and the past exhaling its last echo before forgiveness' new chapter began. His lips met hers in a way youth never managed. Courage without performance, surrender without doubt, fire without destruction. Not dulled by humility, empowered by it. The kiss was intense, reverent, overdue, but not delayed by hesitation anymore. A punctuation mark heaven had been preparing for 7 winters and 100 whispered prayers. The bonfire behind glowed taller, not louder, because what seals redemption isn't noise. It's presence that stays long enough for hearts to believe again. Zoe's hand gripped his flannel sleeve gently, pulse hammering slower now. Body not performing healing anymore but confirming it. Soul quietly surrendered but fire steadily lit by Grace's unseen highlight reel. Jonah exhaled into the kiss, emotions falling into place like fences repaired plank by plank. Zoe exhaled into him, because return rebuilt nothing without staying. And Jonah was finally staying. And the South finally believed the work was true.